I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. Well, we don't have John and we don't have Steve
friends?
today. My friends?
Where are your sober friends?
They're not here. They're not here today. I'm doing this solo because this was done kind of last minute. I have a real job, but I have the flexibility to come in here when they can't come in. So you just got me today. The good news is I'm the most charming of the three of them.
Oh, wonderful.
You don't need to see their old asses. So we might as well just slap the explicit label like right on here and just say fuck to begin with, because I have Andrea. I know too many. I know Andreas and I know Andreas. I have Andrea from the Adult Child Podcast. Pretty big podcast. It's the one that I know that really handles adult children of alcoholics. If you don't start laughing like I did when I listened to the first episode, you're not doing it right, and then you don't have a sense of humor. But Andrea, I've wanted to have you on for a very long time to talk about alcoholic family issues and AWOL stuff. Andrea, welcome to the Sober Friends Podcast. Hi.
I thought the E stands for everyone, not explicit.
Oh, it does?
No. Did you hear that? Did you hear me?
So
no. Somebody left me a review, and it said, the podcast said E, which means for everyone, but it was riddled with bad language.
Oh, riddled with bad language is definitely.
And I said,
you got the right one.
I started, and I typically don't comment on the reviews, but I felt like I needed to. And I just like, hey, for anybody who doesn't know, that E stands for explicit, not for everyone.
That feels like it's self-explanatory, but you don't know it, people.
Well, they must have kept listening, because I noticed that after I said that, they changed their 2-star review to a 4-star review.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's the type of change I'd like to see.
So everybody, I think E stands for everybody when it's like video games.
Right, it is.
But not for music or anything else.
No.
For podcasts, yeah.
Why would they have that? Go and look at the podcasts that do bedtime stories and stuff. There's no E there.
Yeah, I know. E stands for we say fuck way too much.
Absolutely. That's what you got. You got a woman here who's got a potty mouth. So that's what we're going to have today. And how can you not like have a potty mouth if you've grown up with alcoholic families and with dysfunction? So I'll tell you the story I was starting to tell you before we started. My son Owen is 14. He's an honor student. He excels at like everything he does, unlike me. And I'm like, I want to play you Andrea's podcast. I'm going to have her on the podcast today. Let's listen to a little bit. And we listened to like a couple seconds. He goes, Dad, are we in a dysfunctional family? I feel like our family's dysfunctional. So I'm like, I turned off the podcast. I'm like, all right, tell me, pal, what is the idea of dysfunction to you? Tell me a little bit. And I want you to be honest. I want you to feel comfortable. And he talked about my great aunt, who is a total disaster. I'm like, yeah, that's dysfunctional. Talked about alcoholic aunts and uncles. I'm like, yeah, that's the case. I go, think about it this way. When you have people in your family who are dysfunctional or who are alcoholic, and then you have other members who are codependent and are, what's the word I'm looking for? Not complicit, but they are
enablers.
They're enablers of those people. That's like you put the ingredients in the soup and turn the water on and you have something totally different. So when you have enablers and you have alcoholics in the family, you create an environment, this stew, that is really uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. I go, so yeah, you're picking it up right. He's like, not you and Mom. I think our family's fine. I'm like, it would be okay if you said we weren't, but I appreciate that. I'm like, my mom's side of the family, it's a disaster. Total my father's side, disaster. Alcoholism everywhere.
Have there been moments where, when you reflect back on your parenting, where have there been times where you've had to course correct?
Oh, a whole bunch of times. Mostly when I lose my temper. I'm usually good at not losing my temper until I lose my temper. So there's no middle ground. I go from like, as you see now, to explosive anger. There's no in between. So it catches people off guard. I'm calm, I'm calm, I'm calm, nuclear meltdown. And that's where I have to course correct with people. Because then I start blaming and pointing the finger and yelling. And then the kids get anxiety attacks and I've ruined them for the night. That's where amends come in with them. I think this is closer to a 10th step amends, but there's a lot of 10th step amends that I do in those situations. And I really hate that because I pride myself in emotional intelligence of don't express the anger, see if you can work through it. And sometimes it works.
But it's unrealistic to think that it's never going to happen, though. You know, you're a human.
Yeah. At work, this is a value that we have around emotional intelligence, and I tie it into recovery. And that's where I kick myself when I lose my temper. It is so hard sometimes. But that's about it. I don't know.
It sounds like you're doing a pretty good job.
I try. There are times that my wife and I have conversations that she loses her temper and I feel comfortable to pull her aside and like, no more. Back away. Stop doing that. This is not helping the situation. Let me get in. I'm the calmer of the two.
Is your wife in recovery?
She's not.
No.
No, she doesn't drink at all.
Weirdo.
Yeah, it's for an alcoholic, it's upsetting to see the way her relationship with alcohol.
Yeah,
And I mean
tell me
that
about it.
I mean that in terms of you go to a restaurant with
She
her.
leaves half a glass of wine on the table.
No, she wouldn't even do that. She's like, I'd like a glass of wine, but I'll be tired. So I'm not going to drink.
Boring.
Or I'll get a headache. And I don't want to do that. But she would, when she would drink, it would be like, oh, what a nice glass of wine, and have like 2 sips and not finish it. Oh, I can't have any more. If I have any more, I'm going to be exhausted. Like, who lives that way?
It's very unfortunate.
So I try.
Fortunate.
I don't. So she got rid of all the booze when I got sober. I came down. She was like pouring with 2 hands, like her favorite champagne and something else, because she just didn't want it here. And she doesn't. It's not a craving for her in any way.
Does she have any vices?
That's a really great question. Her vices are compulsions. So if she sees like weeds on the side of the house, she could be out there pulling all day. Like she will not stop until it's perfect. And what
A little
pisses,
bit of perfectionism, perhaps.
oh yeah, there's that. And she gets that from her family. I see those things in her family.
Yeah, and perhaps that's where your son being upset with the B+ stems from.
She also grew up with eating disorder issues that she's overcome. So I see the eating disorder things in her, even though I've not known her while she was active, but I've seen those issues in her and other things. That's more her issue.
Yeah, food is hard.
Yep.
You
It's
have
hard
to
for
eat
me.
it. Yeah, food is life.
Yeah, I do. I do too. I love it too much.
I went on a
And-
date like about a month ago, and within the first 30 minutes, the guy said something about how he like really goes out of his way to avoid processed white flour. And I was like, this is not going to work. I was like, when was the last time you had pizza? He didn't know. I'm like, this is not going to work.
Who says that on a first date?
I don't know. This weird gentleman.
So this is what makes me feel good about being married as long as I've been, is I couldn't handle that.
It's rough. Well, that's why I got to get out of San Francisco, because there's too many people that are. I mean, it's all for you if you want to be vegan, but I need somebody that wants to eat meat, cheese, and carbs.
Right. Stuffed shells, lasagna.
Yeah, let's overeat every once in a while.
How far from San Francisco are you going?
I'm going to Florida.
Oh, you're going to Florida. Okay, you're moving right across the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was bummed. We were talking before the podcast where I was bummed for you leaving San Francisco, and then you told me the whole underside of San Francisco being gross.
It's awful. There was twice as many COVID deaths. I mean, fatal overdoses as there were COVID deaths.
I don't know about you. I know tons and tons of people who OD'd over the last 3 or 4 years. A lot of fentanyl stuff. People who would be in a meeting and they would share something that like they've been sober a year and a half. They'd share something that like would blow me away. I'm like, damn, this person's got better sobriety than me with the stuff they're saying, and they're dead the next day. Over and over and over again.
It's scary. It's scary. So there was some fentanyl laying out at a park.
Oh my God.
Happened last week. A 2-year-old almost died.
Yeah, there's not much that you need with fentanyl to have a problem.
No. And yeah, it's crazy. I feel so grateful I never got into opiates.
Oh, I took some pain pills. I had surgery on both my knees and they gave me Vicodin, and I just couldn't wait to get more Vicodin. And I had to stop taking it. I'm like, this is not going to go well.
Yeah, I know. I had a surgery once too, and I was like, freebie.
Yeah.
But I never enjoyed it. It always made me sick to my stomach. It makes me itchy. I mean, obviously being a teenage addict, like I would take whatever I could get my hands on. So like going over to like friends' houses and going through parents' medicine cabinets and stuff like that, and just having my old phone, it wasn't an iPhone, and like Googling to see like what the term, like if it said like this will make you drowsy, like that always meant like, that was a pretty good sign that maybe this is something I could get fucked up off of. But I mean, I would take whatever I could, but opiates were not my cup of tea.
See, I could power through the upset stomach because I knew if I just got on a rhythm of opiates for long enough, the upset stomach would go away.
Yeah. Well, except for when you stop taking them.
And that's why I stopped, because I'm like, I see where this is going. I see what it's going to be like to stop, and I'll become an addict. And I'm like, I don't want to be an addict, because if that's the case, I probably won't be able to drink anymore. That was my thought process, but I loved it.
I limit yourself. You could do it all.
It was all about control. So with my story, I was not going to be an alcoholic because my father was an alcoholic, and I was not going to be like him. So I would drink in such a way not to get up to a certain line, because once I crossed it, then I'd be an alcoholic. So it was always over my head that I can drink up to a certain point, but if I go over that point, I'll become an alcoholic, and I don't want to be like him, and I don't want to be an alcoholic, and I don't want things to happen where I would have to stop drinking. So if I became an alcoholic, then things would have to change. This was always going on in my head all the time, especially when I'd have my first beer or first glass of wine. Mm-hmm. The committee in my head was screaming. And it didn't occur to me that because all this stuff was going on in my head, I already had a problem.
But that meant you were already an alcoholic. Exactly.
So you've been sober for pretty long. If I go to the website, it looks like
14 years.
Holy cow.
I know.
So I have no idea what your age is.
I'm 33. I got sober at 19.
Oh my gosh. So with me, people could be anywhere from 25 to 45, and I can't tell anymore, but it appeared to be pretty young. Like 18. How does that happen?
I'm definitely not 45. Well, I got scapegoated.
So you talked about that a lot this week in your podcast. Tell me more.
Yeah. So I became the identified patient of my family when I was 9. And, my parents sent me to therapy, and I developed separation anxiety with my mom. And then I remember asking years later, like, did you ever tell the therapist that you were an alcoholic and that you and dad fought all the time? And her response was, no, it didn't seem relevant. And I really, it was a manifestation of what was going on in our home. And then when I started drinking and using drugs at 12, that worked in fixing the family. Like, my mom stopped drinking as much, and my parents stopped fighting as much, and they really had to come together to focus on me. And so then it's like from 12 to 19, in and out of rehabs and boarding schools and outpatient rehabs and all of the things. And they were really on my ass. I mean, my parents were taking me to the hospital every week to get drug tested. And in a way, I feel like that really fueled my addiction, because then there was this website. It was called, I think it probably still exists. I don't know how to pronounce it. It was like Erowid. It's EROWID. And I would go on there and I would like search for like over-the-counter medications that I could get fucked up on, because it wouldn't show up in a drug test. And so I would take like a bottle of Dramamine. I would take like 12 Benadryl. And the high was so fucking miserable. Like, it's not an enjoyable high. But that's like at such a young age, even a miserable high is better than nothing.
Right.
And then at 16 is like really when I became a daily drinker, and you know, and a lot of it was all toxic shame too, right? Like it was just, you know, I became such a horrible human when I drank and pushed people away. And so then that created the isolation. And so I had to drink more, you know, to deal with the isolation. And then that pushes people away even more. And by 18, I'm drinking around the clock, and I was so isolated, you know, and it was really, you know, I knew that I probably was going to have to stop drinking at some point. I was very aware that it was on all sides of my family and that I didn't stand a chance. But I just had no idea it was going to progress as quickly as it did. And thank God that it did in ways, you know. But I would be dead. I mean, I was so sick. I was, you know, drinking around the clock. And
at that age, yeah.
so, yeah, thank
Any
God.
siblings? You an only child?
Only.
I'm an only child too. I can relate.
Only child. So, and then I did have a relapse. I think that this is a good story for people to share. So I got sober at 18, and then around 6 months sober, I started dating a guy in the program. Great idea, always. And he told me that he was going to date this other girl instead. And I knew that I was going to see them at a meeting that night. And so I knew that there was Klonopin in the house. And I was like, the only way I can go to this meeting and face them is if I take one of these Klonopin. So I take one, I go to the meeting.
What's a Klonopin?
I get home that night, I Google, is one pill a relapse?
So that's alcoholic thinking. What is a Klonopin?
It's like Xanax. It's a benzo. And so, yeah, guess if you're wondering, peeps, one pill is a relapse, especially if it's not prescribed to you and you're taking it to change the way that you feel. And so it was. And so then it was like a week later, and I was like, oh, it's been like a whole week since I've thought about taking one. Like, surely you can take another one. Took another one. You know, before long, I'm off to the races. I picked up a 9-month chip when I did not have 9 minutes sober. And then finally hit bottom, and that was September 13th, 2008 was when I eventually got sober.
And stayed sober from that point.
Be great, yeah. And then I realized that I had all these other fucking issues.
So if you're listening to this and you don't have a problem, if for some reason you listen to this and you're not somebody who drinks alcoholically, and you hear that may sound insane. Of she went to a meeting. The purpose of a meeting is to stay sober, but couldn't get through the meeting without being high on something. That makes no sense. To me, that makes complete sense. I totally see that mindset. It's a bad mindset, but I can understand that mindset, which tells me I'm in the right place. I have a problem.
Yeah, you definitely do.
As I remember one time I was in a meeting and I mentioned, you know, there are times that I've questioned whether I really had a problem. And one of the old timers in the back just screamed, "Hey, you keep coming." I'm like, okay, I guess I have a problem. If the old guy has heard me long enough and said that.
What do you like, you know, the whole saying, like, we don't end up in an AA meeting by mistake?
No.
Like, it's so true. Like, maybe 0.0001% do. I don't think that everybody that gets a DUI is an alcoholic. I think anyone who gets more than one DUI probably is.
I never had one.
Me neither.
I was careful out drinking. There were times that I should not have been driving, but I could be careful because I knew I had booze at home. So yeah, I'll have 2 beers, I'll drive home, and then I can drink the way I want to drink, because I didn't want people in public to point their finger at me and say, you have a drinking problem. There was nothing worse you could possibly say to me than, I think you have a drinking problem. So I hid it. And I hid it from an early age.
How long have you been sober?
Been sober since March 21st, 2014.
Nice.
So we're closing in on 9 years. I still feel like I'm in year 1. I feel like a new guy still.
I get it.
Nothing's changed.
That's not true.
Well, I know nothing's changed, but in my mind, I'm like, hey, I'm the same guy. And then I open my mouth and people say, wow, that was really good. And I'm like, really? Okay. I guess I'm coming along.
I hear you.
When did you get involved with I'm going to say, I don't want to say AWOL because that's a way of life, but that's different. Adult children alcoholics, a way of life. There are meetings you can go to where you can do an Alcoholics Anonymous, a way of life meeting, where it's like really intensive 12-step stuff. if John was here, John can tell you because he's done those AWOL groups. It's really intensive 12-step stuff.
But is it
But
not addiction specific? It's kind of just like
it is.
recovery.
It's alcoholism specific,
Okay.
but it's intensive stuff.
So
But when
like
I get
kind of
the,
like emotional sobriety type stuff?
I think so. I've never gone through it.
I've never even heard
But
of
it's
it.
like the group goes through like 12 weeks and they do every step together intensely.
Yeah, you said AWOL earlier that we were going to talk about that, and I was like, I don't know what the fuck that is.
No, it was my slip of the tongue.
ACA. Yeah. So I I think I first heard the term adult child maybe around 4 years sober when I was at therapy, and my therapist had talked about how one of her other patients had was going to this program. And it's so crazy to me to think that like, oh, that's not really applicable to me. I mean, I knew that I grew up in an alcoholic home, but really, I really did not think that it had impacted me that much, especially since I became the problem at such a young age, you know? And so it was at 7 years sober when I dated Brian number one, and we dated for less than a month. He ghosts me, and I literally feel like my husband of 30 years just tragically died in a plane crash. I became non-functioning. I couldn't go to work. I had to have my mom come out and fly to stay with me. She was not sober. That just goes to show you how fucking desperate I was. And it was in the midst of that breakup that I had my first aha, where I realized that there was no way that the way that I was feeling in that moment could actually have anything to do with this bozo. And then it was shortly after that that I realized that that this was a feeling that I felt often as a child. And I realized that separation anxiety that I felt as a young girl that led me to getting sent to therapy at 9, that was the feeling that I experienced like in relationships. And so I don't know why I hadn't connected the dots up until then. And I don't know why the hell none of my sponsors had you know what I mean? Like, what the hell? Like, that's why this podcast and this topic needs to be out there, because
I
why
agree.
the fuck wasn't anybody able to tell me what the hell was going on with me for so long, you know? And maybe I wouldn't have received it. I don't know. But it sure seems like somebody should have been able to like clue me in a little bit. So I go to an AA meeting shortly after that, and I hear this woman with over 30 years talk about how when she had 7 years sober, that a breakup caused her to realize the true impact that her childhood had on her. She mentioned adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. I go home, I read the book, my mind is blown. It was like, oh, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one. And it gave me a lot of hope, because I was just starting to think like that there was no hope for me. Because I had been trying to improve like in the relationship area for so long. And I would have these long breaks in between relationships where I'd be feeling really good about myself. And I'd be positive that it was going to be different this time. And it wasn't. It was worse. And so I see her about a week later. I go to the same meeting and I run up to her. Her name was Marcy. And I was like, Marcy, your share impacted me so much. Like, I read this book. My mind is blown. She's like, that's great, Andrea. But I just want you to know that just like reading that book isn't going to be enough. She said, this is going to take you years of therapy. This is your life's work. And I'm thinking, what? Years? I don't have years, lady. Like, I'm about to be 30 and I'm going to be essentially a grandma. So we need this fixed like yesterday. So I'm like, I'll take a break. A year off. I read this book. Surely that's enough. And no, it wasn't, you know. September 2017, enter Brian number 2. The worst 6 months of my entire life, the most miserable 6 months of my entire life. I felt and acted exactly in the same ways that I did at the very height of my alcoholism. And it was like in that, and it's more painful, right? Because I was sober, or like kind of sober, physically sober. And that's when I realized like how fucking serious what I was dealing with was. And it was really like the realization that truly my alcoholism was just a symptom of this underlying stuff. And so, yeah, that's when like everything changed. And I Googled adult children of alcoholic therapists. You know, I'd been working with this one woman for years and she was wonderful, but this wasn't her neck of the woods. And I was so reluctant to look for somebody new because I'm thinking there's so much for me to like update the person on and get them caught up on my story. It's going to take forever for like me to start actually getting any better. And that turned out not to be the case. And I found, I Googled adult children of alcoholic therapists, and I found this group. They're called the Addictions Institute, but it's run by this woman, Stephanie Brown, who is like one of the pioneers of the ACA movement. She's actually in the Big Red Book. And so I spoke with her, and then she connected me to my therapist, and I started working with her. I saw her twice a week for like the first year and a half, and I see her now still once a week, and the woman has fucking saved my life. She saved my fucking life. And yeah, it's just been the most beautiful, amazing healing journey. So much pain has turned into so much good. I'm not fixed by any means, but I sure as hell have changed significantly.
I've accepted that we're never going to be fixed.
No.
I think what really has helped me is it took me a lot of therapy, but it took a lot of therapy that it's just progress. It's a journey. It's progress. I will never be fixed. But if I'm getting better a little bit each day, for me, that's going to be enough. I personally am not doing enough with adult children stuff. My therapist, I found out about this from my therapist as well, and she gave me the book. I could not get past the first chapter. Mm-hmm. The first chapter was too upsetting. I just remember reading it, and every time I go back to it, every couple of pages, it would be upsetting to read. Mm-hmm. It was too deep. It was too much. And I kept telling her, I have to read this. I have to read this. She goes, if this is causing you pain, put it down. I can understand that it's opening up, because it was opening up wounds, just page after page. And it was like 2 or 3 pages. And I'm like, I can't do this. This is too much.
I was in all of my wounds were opened at that point. You know what I mean? Like I had reached that point of desperation that I did like when I got sober, So I'm like, let's do the damn thing, But it is. I mean, I think that that's a very unique, not unique experience. I think that that's the way that it is. It's for all of our issues, right?
Right.
I mean, that's just unfortunately the way that it is. Like we'll get awareness and we kind of dance around the pool before we dive in.
I had to dance around a lot of this stuff. Even my mom was dying. Mm-hmm. We had a very strained relationship revolving around my stepfather, who was abusive and an alcoholic, and she took his side. And she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And even in the time that, okay, she's got pancreatic cancer at stage 4, she's going to die, there were still things I was too uncomfortable to talk about with her. Mm. There were things like, if I don't talk about this now, I'm going to miss this opportunity because she's going to die. And there was still some stuff that just was not comfortable. And she was in denial about her own position. She died much quicker than I thought. She was gone in a month. So it was much quicker than I thought. But it was all of this stuff that even in this position where in a sense you have nothing to lose because she's going to be gone, I still couldn't touch upon this stuff.
Yeah, but if she's not in a place to like...
That's the thing, is I was afraid she would be uncomfortable. And you couldn't talk about anything with her. Very easily, it was all small talk, and it was all superficial. Anything deeper than that, she would get incredibly uncomfortable.
I think a lot of the times, too, that I think sometimes it's easier for us to heal these wounds. At least this is what I hear. Both of my parents are still alive, but I think that it's a little bit different when they're gone because they're no longer inflicting harm.
There's also no hope at that point, because I think there's also that underlying theme of they could change someday. They could get better.
Yes, this fantasy.
And when they die, it's final. I hadn't seen my father since Christmas Day of 1982 and found out from an ex-wife of his who reached out to me on Facebook to say he had died. And he had died an alcoholic death. I hadn't seen him in forever. And it was incredibly upsetting to me, and I was surprised by it because it was final. There was these feelings of maybe he would get sober, maybe we could have a relationship late in his life, but it was never going to happen because now he's gone. And I think that finality is the piece.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to when you're talking about saying this stuff to your mom, it really has to be, we really have to be in a place to where however they react to it is not in play at all. We have to be in a position that we need to say this for ourselves, and it really does not matter at all what their reaction may or may not be. Anytime we're saying something or rooted in this, what you're talking about, this false hope or this fantasy that somehow they're going to change, or that somehow they're going to see and hear us, or that somehow we're going to be able to have this relationship with them that we've always dreamed of having, like that means we need to not say it.
I think there's something in there that I shouldn't necessarily care about somebody else's reaction to. Then I'm the whole keeping your side of the street clean, but there's an aspect of rejection for me.
But I think that that's probably unrealistic to like think that you can just not care whatsoever. I mean, I don't think that that's realistic. Of course that's going to be there.
Yeah, but it could be not crippling.
Agreed.
I give you an example. I think this comes from adult child stuff. I'm chasing after a guest who is a pretty big name, and I've been chasing for 2 months now, and I finally got them to say yes, and then they're not really responding to my emails or giving me times and dates that I can't do, and then ghosting, and then I come back and they're giving me vague stuff. And I was talking to my wife, and I had anxiety pinned to like level 10 about this. And I'm like, why am I upset? Why am I upset? Why am I upset? And she goes, you don't like rejection. And I'm like, that is exactly what it is.
Yeah, I think it's a reflection of, it's triggering the wound of I'm not good enough.
Absolutely. When you get this close to like this fantasy you have, and you've been chasing this, and you see this is what it could be, and then they still say yes, and it's just stick the landing, and you can't. It feels like there's something wrong with me. Did I ask the wrong way? Am I pushing too hard? Am I doing this? And I told my wife, I go, this is part selfishness. It's not about me.
Yes, but, and I've always been weird, like it took, and I'm still kind of trying to get on board with the whole inner child stuff, but like those are the opportunities like where you get to reparent your inner child and let them know that you are good enough, and that this other person doesn't get to dictate who you are, and letting your inner child know that I'm not rejecting you. Right. So it's not, I think sometimes like with AA, this is kind of like where it becomes like in conflict a little bit with the adult child stuff, because it's like, oh, you're so selfish, this is all about you. But in reality, a lot of it's like this hurt inner child of ours that really just needs to be comforted, and not being told that you're selfish. And, that's where I think sometimes that stuff can like almost re-traumatize us in a way.
Yeah, I think there's a fine line there. And I do have open ears when people talk about selfishness and you're thinking of yourself when you have this pain, because there it is that I'm just not thinking beyond myself. On the other hand, there's different issues that you have to address based on how you grew up.
Well, because it's because what you need to, and this is what I talk about in my step 6 and 7 issues. It's like it's a trauma response in a way, like you're having a reaction that's rooted in this like I need to survive, like a survival mentality, Yeah,
I like 6 and 7. That's where I am a lot of times. I can't say that I want to get rid of my defects, because there's a lot of times I don't. It's self-sabotage, but I don't want to get rid of them sometimes, but I do it because I want to stay sober. There's a lot of, I will tell you, there's a lot of my bad behaviors that I've lost the ability to enjoy with. I used to like to argue with people and push buttons, and I could cut you down. So Steve says on the show, you could cut people down and they won't even know that you have taken an X-Acto knife and cut them to pieces, that you're so good at it. And I used to take such joy in that. I can't anymore, because I realize I'm violating parts of the program. This puts me at risk of drinking. I don't want to do that. So I'm just not going to go there anymore. And if I end up being a boring person because of that, I'm fine being boring. I'm fine people saying, I don't want to be around him. He's so dull. I would rather be dull than drinking.
Yeah, exactly. But that was one big piece, though, that I had to really come to grips with, too, as far as viewing a lot of the stuff that I was dealing with, like, not as character defects, but as trauma responses. Because the thing was, is like, I couldn't just pray it away. Like, I had to, like, my reactions in romantic relationships, this wasn't an issue of character defects. This was unresolved trauma. And so I think that, like, I could really get into, like, a big place of shame as far as, like, well, I'm working 6 and 7 and I'm, like, doing this work. I'm trying to pray it away. I'm turning it over to God, but it's still not fucking working. And it's like, well, no, because there's trauma. There's unresolved trauma. It's not you acting in a character defect. It's you acting in a trauma response.
I can so identify with that because my relationships prior to getting married were all about that. There was so much pain in those relationships, and I didn't know about trauma. My job at work is I'm a manager. I manage people, and a lot of what I do is I coach them. We meet weekly on their job performance, and I can't tell you how many times I brought in, you're going through trauma. I have somebody on my team who has issues with the father of her child, and she'll tell me certain things, and I have to pause. I'm like, I need you need to, I wouldn't say you need to go to therapy. I'm like, I would recommend it. Do you realize that what you're telling me is trauma? And you should, and it's part of, you should feel amazing that in spite of this trauma, look at what you accomplish. Now imagine if you accept that you had some trauma and you address it. Like, this is okay, but you don't have, it's this feeling I saw in myself that something's wrong with me. Why can't I be like other people? Well, other people haven't gone through the emotional and sometimes physical trauma that I did, and it echoes in other ways. And I don't have the skills to get past that when I'm in relationships with people.
Yeah, we all react differently too. I mean, two people can experience the same type of trauma and yet have it affect them completely differently.
Right.
You know? And I think that that's the big thing too, and a message that needs to get across is because so many people, myself included, think, well, my childhood wasn't that bad. I was never hit. I was never sexually abused, so I shouldn't be this screwed up. And the fact of the matter is, I think a lot of the subtle stuff it's so insidious.
You can just not feel safe at home. It's sort of like, well, I'm not an alcoholic because I haven't had a DUI. Is that what the threshold is? You have to be sexually abused first?
And that's what Pete Walker talks about in Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, how the core wound for us all is actually just emotional neglect, is really like what lays at the core of all of it for us. But it's hard because we look back on our experiences with our adult brain and we're like, oh, well, that's not that big of a deal. But it's like, that's not how your child brain viewed it at the time.
No, I have situations where I was treated a certain way because of hostility towards my mother by other family members. Mm-hmm. I had an uncle, every time I went over his house, my uncle would say, here comes the hemorrhoid. Every single time. I must have been 4, maybe 4. My grandfather would always invite me to play in traffic. Mm-hmm. He could swim underwater in a 4 or 5-year-old brain, like incredibly long. And I'd ask him, how are you able to swim underwater so long without taking a breath? And he'd say, well, I breathe underwater. You should try it too. Like, that's the type of stuff I was dealing with as a kid, like things like that. And it's like, normal families don't tell young kids who are impressionable, try and breathe underwater and you'll be fine.
What do you know about your mom's upbringing?
She was treated like shit. Mm-hmm. She was expected to be the parent for everybody else. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that my grandfather or my step-grandfather had alcohol issues. I do not know about her real father because we never talked about him. But there was alcoholism in the family. She ended up marrying an alcoholic. So I think there was a lot of codependency issues. There was a lot of enabling. She was treated like crap and expected to parent the other kids, treated unfairly. Mm-hmm. But there was definitely emotional abuse growing up. She told me that she went out for a date one time And I asked my mother, why do you cut your hair the way you did? She cut it in a way where you can never see her ears, because she was very self-conscious of her ears, because she said, your grandmother would run out of the house after me as I'm going off on a date, screaming, there flies Dumbo, there flies Dumbo. Like, this is the type of stuff she went through. So she didn't have any support. Mm-hmm. And then she's dealing with me as a single mom on food stamps. So she didn't have the skills herself and is doing the best she can with me, which is not very good. Mm-hmm. And she never addressed any of her issues. Never, ever, 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 ever.
Like a lot of parents. That's why I feel like we're so lucky. Just to be able to have because all this stuff is pretty new too, you know?
Yep. All of my kids have been in therapy at some point. My 14-year-old son is on medication. He has done like peer counseling and stuff, and he's open about it with people. And he is on like a self-improvement kick. Like, he is constantly pushing himself. So I look at him, he's almost therapy seeing his life, because I see all the things I could have been capable of. I'm like, if he can do these things, I can be good. The greatest feeling I have is he's going into high school and I'm not worried about him at all. Socially, academically, athletically, he's going to be fine.
Pat, give yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah, to the point where he's like, you know what? I'm not asking a girl out right now because I just don't want to deal with it. I just need to be level-headed here.
I don't blame him. Hold on, I need to bust my groceries in. There you go. Well, good. He sounds like you did a good job, Dad.
Well, thank you. I try. I think I did a good job with these kids, as hard as they were. So I know the question I was going to ask before I talk about your podcast. What's your relationship with God? Because this is one of these things that is very difficult for me. I struggle here.
So I feel like the more connected I get to my higher power, the less I understand it. Sometimes I can beat myself up that I don't have a very like well-established, rigid, routine spiritual practice. I feel like, and that's bullshit for me to think that I need to have that. But what I will tell you is it's just, thank you. I feel my higher power so strongly through all of the just divinely inspired interactions and synchronicities with other people. And when I reflect upon everything that has occurred for me to get to this very moment where you and I are talking, it's impossible for me to deny that there's not a higher power. Impossible. And especially in the past year. So I got fired from my job in January, which like I was a fucking horrible employee. I'm not one of those people that can like work hard no matter what. If I'm not into something, I suck. And so I started this podcast in March of 2021. And then I wouldn't say I was the greatest employee before then either, but especially after that, I wasn't. And my boss didn't know about the podcast. Thank God for COVID so that I could be at home and start a podcast.
Right.
But I didn't feel good about myself because I knew that I wasn't showing up as the employee that they deserved to have, But at the same time, I wasn't in a financial position to where I could afford to just do the podcast. And so I would like try to kick it into gear, and I would like do okay for maybe like 2 days, and then I'd be sucking again, and I didn't feel great about myself. And then finally my boss in January was like, this isn't working. And I was like, you're absolutely right, it's not working. And as much as I was not in a position to not have a regular job, I wholeheartedly knew that this was like the push off the ledge from the universe saying like, this is your purpose. This is what you're meant to do. And I have just been taken care of. And it's been really, there's been times when I've spun out or I get into control, but it's like time and time again, I'm being taken care of. And so it's just been really, I've just been getting so much evidence that I don't have to have it all figured out. That's something that I really struggle with and still struggle with, is like this idea that in order for me to get there, wherever there is, that I have to know every single little step and detail and
Me
plan
too.
on how to get there. And that's not the case. That's not the case. And I have so much proof that that's not the case, you know? And so it's just been, this whole experience with the podcast especially has just been this continual practice of letting go and taking my control, feeling like I need to have everything figured out, thinking that there's no way you're going to have the life that you want to have unless you have every single little fucking detail figured out. And then finally being in so much pain where I let go, and then my higher power does something. It's like, chill the fuck out. Like, I'm in the driver's seat here. Just keep showing up, you know? And also too, like with pain, if you would have told me that, like, when I, like with the Bryans, like then I don't know, 4 years later, I would be sitting here, like, I would have told you that you were fucking crazy. So it's just like, there's always a plan. We're always exactly where we're supposed to be. Embrace your pain.
I think this is the stuff that I need, because I can be very closed off, and there are so many God moments that come my way. And I see other people in the program who have such a rich relationship with their higher power, and I see their sobriety. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And I think what I've gotten better at is being okay with, I need to let go with the understanding of what this might be. If I'm looking to put it in a box and I don't see it in a linear way the way I want to, well, then it must not exist. Mm-hmm. But there's an idea that it could be on another dimension or on another plane that I have no way of understanding and just being good with that. Mm-hmm. Too much of a thinker there.
It's scary. It's not tangible. It's hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I totally get it. I understand. But then it's like these moments that I have where it's like, clearly, there's something going on here. Clearly.
I was on another podcast last week, and this was the topic, was the golden key stuff of when you're anxious about something, turn to God. And I told the host, I go, oh my God, I'm going to be a train wreck doing this because I'm struggling. And I've just been articulating this to somebody else. So this is what's really funny is this topic comes up about God when I seem to need it. There's somebody I'm working on a project with a charity with who is also in recovery and has a really strong relationship with a higher power, very strong. And I sent her a picture of this postcard. I'm on a postcard for my 25th anniversary college reunion. So it's a picture of me like 25, 26 years ago. And I told her, oh, I cringe looking at myself. And she's like, stop it. God made you. There's nothing wrong with how you look because God made you. And I hadn't thought about it that way. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready to believe that, but I need to hear that. And that changes how I feel.
Yeah. And then there's like the control aspect with your relationship with your higher power too, right?
Oh, there's that. I think the control aspect is a big, big deal.
Yeah, and feeling a need of control as far as like what your relationships, it's just all of it.
Yep.
All of it. It's I feel you, man.
This is where I feel a little bit better is I'm 8 years into sobriety and there are new things every day. And sometimes I say to myself, why the hell haven't I figured this out yet? I should have had this figured out by 8 years. No. But you're just not going to.
No. You know, I had so much shame, like when I started going through these issues. What the hell is wrong with me? I'm 7 years sober. I'm 9 years sober. So I got sober in Florida. And whether or not this is the case, this is what I heard in meetings. People who had a lot of time, 20 plus years. Life sucked. I got sober. And sure, life on life's terms happens, but like, pain of my own making ceased the day that I got sober. Like that was kind of the messages that I heard. And so there was this intense shame that I felt that I was in so much pain because of my own choices in relationships. And I found this meeting here in San Francisco and it's called 10 Years Plus. And so it's focused on issues of long-term sobriety. And it was like every single fucking person in there had a similar story to me. Like, it's common. It's like, more will constantly be revealed. There's always more opportunities for growth. But I feel like I finally gotten to the place where, like, I am open to that. And when we were talking about the concept of, like, being fixed, like, I don't ever want to be fixed, you know, because I see what happens when I go through these challenges and I get to the other side of it, and the connection with myself and my understanding with like, that's the other thing too, as far as all of my friends that I got sober with, none of them went through this like horrible, like second emotional bottom. And there was this part of me that was like, oh, like, why me? Why me? Well, the fact of the matter is that, like, I've now had the opportunity to go so much deeper in my healing. And I know myself at such a deeper level than they do. And so I really honor and cherish it. I'm grateful for being so fucked up.
I mean, who's really not? I think that's the thing is if you're brand new in sobriety, you're listening to this and you're hearing two people who have quite a bit of sobriety between them, and you're hearing of our own issues. This is not like a smartphone app. It's not immediate. And that's really hard nowadays, that this is a journey that it's going to take you initially months to feel better. And life is not going to be great all the time, but you will have the tools to get through it when life sucks. And it may take years for you to address things to get to a better place. And it's about I think that's where one day at a time comes in, is I think you have to learn something new every day and be okay with it's going to take time.
There was something that my therapist will bring up for me. Like, I have certain like themes or patterns or issues that pop up from time to time. And she's just like, are you able to come to a place of acceptance that, like, maybe this is just going to be one of your things? You know, maybe, like, she's like, I have stuff that's just like, it's just shit that's going to come up from time to time. And it's like, just coming to a place of acceptance that, like, okay, like, this is going to be like a struggle, you know, a challenge, an opportunity for growth throughout my life. And to have this idea that I'm going to get past it is unrealistic. And that just creates shame.
I want to talk a little bit about your podcast and where people can hear it. And I just had the website up and I've gone to the wrong page.
You can find it everywhere.
You can find it everywhere, but you also have a Patreon. Yeah. So
such an amazing community.
So if you've created a community in a short period of time where people are willing to pay you, you are in rarefied air. There are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and there are a handful that anybody pays for, let alone loyal enough to say, I'm going to give you some money every single month for services. What do you do for your Patreon subscribers? Because I know some of the stuff you do for them.
We have 3 groups a week, but I'm about to do a rebrand and do more. So this is something that's interesting. Here's a place where I'm still having to work through feelings of like, feeling not worthy or not good enough, because I need to, let's be honest, like, a girl's got to make a living.
Yeah.
And what I'm offering is worth a lot more than $5 a month,
yeah.
You know? But like, I have this feeling that like, oh, but I'm not worth that. I'm not, you know, like all of those things, like, I'm not worth it. So I'm having to work through that. So we're going to do a rebrand. But so my goal is I have big visions. So here's the deal. And I'm not trying to shit on any program, but like, unfortunately, a lot of ACA meetings are not the best. You know, in AA, there's a sense of being able to like laugh at our shit. That's not happening a lot in ACA meetings. A lot of people go and they're like, I feel fucking worse now. And so you're not going to find anything. You're not going to find anything like this community. Like, it is, I'm so blown away at how fucking vulnerable everybody is. this is just like such a safe place for people. And I hope that through my example of being vulnerable and authentic, that like,
Yeah, it's because you set the tone. You set the tone in being okay of, I'm not perfect, I'm fucked up sometimes. It's okay for you to be too.
yes, and to be able to laugh about it too.
Yep.
So, and I think that my sense of humor acts as a filter for certain people. So like there's no fucking lame people in this group, you know? Like everybody can laugh at themselves. So yeah, so we have 3 groups a week, but then we also have a WhatsApp chat that's like going on constantly, which is fucking amazing, that people literally like, you're going through anybody. We're all across the globe. So somebody's going to be awake. Someone's going to be up if you're going. And so it's, you know, it's people struggling, but then it's also like people sharing like a stupid meme about like condiments and, you know, and it's just, we've created this, it really feels like a family. And we had a shit show retreat a couple months ago. I got 2 Airbnbs in Florida, and we just like ate and played games and laughed. And I want to be able to do those twice a year. I want, you know, my goal is like down the road that I can have like a legit like shit show property where like we can do stuff and we can like celebrate the holidays together. And it's just, I was so isolated like prior to starting this, especially with the pandemic. And I have found my peeps. You know, like I have found my peeps, and everyone is all ages from 25 to 70, from, you know, Germany to Argentina. Most people are in the US and Canada. And it's just a really, what was I going to say? I was coming up with a tagline. We talk about serious shit, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. So every meeting, somebody's crying. In every meeting, we're all laughing, you know? So I'm really honored.
I think this is really cool that things like this exist. And it is stuff I bring up in AA meetings of, don't assume with technology now that there's not competition, that you have to be where people are. Because I go to district meetings where I'm volunteering on the district level and people are like, we need to shut down the Zoom. I'm like, you are out of your freaking mind. Because there are other organizations that can come up with the technology and not that much money to recreate an AA or 12-step experience and maybe make it better that is narrowcasted to somebody else. You don't have a monopoly anymore, so be the best option.
Well, my fear too is like, I don't want anybody to think that this isn't a 12-step meeting. So I want to make sure that people understand that. Like, this isn't an ACA meeting. Yeah, we talk about the steps, but we also talk about other forms of recovery. So like, that was kind of a fear too. Are people thinking that I'm like monetizing off this 12 steps? And no, that's not what it is. Have you heard me share about the experience that I had with the intuitive?
No. I have not.
So in between Brian number 1 and Brian number 2, I went and had this like life path reading. She like did my numerology chart, and she was like, a lot of what she was saying didn't make any sense to me, but like the stuff that she was saying, I was like really bummed out about it. She was like, your purpose is spiritual. And I'm like, lame. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like become like a Buddhist monk and like not talk ever? And so I had the recording. And so I listened to it like 2 years later, and I still hadn't had the idea for the podcast, but a lot of what she was saying started to make a lot more sense. And she was talking about how my gift is communication and how I have a way of saying something in a way that can be heard and received by others, that if they had heard it from somebody else, they wouldn't be able to. And I was starting to like understand like that these were kind of my gifts. And then I listened to it again after I started the podcast. And it's just fucking crazy what she was like. She was like, you will only be fulfilled if your vocation and your advocation align. Only if you can see that your words can empower other people to make changes for the good. I can see you having your own recovery groups. Whatever you do, it's going to be spiritually and creatively based, and it will be in the field of communication. So like, not trying to like, you know, be an egomaniac, but folks, this is what I was was meant to be doing. So come join the damn Patreon.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a fine line there, and I think there's a little bit of stigma of making money on anything recovery-wise. And I look at it this way. It's okay for therapists to make money. It's
No
okay
shit.
for drug and alcohol counselors to make money. This is sort of the same thing. If you're providing a resource that people find valuable, then you should be able to be compensated for that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially if you're providing a good service that's helping people. It takes time and talent to do that.
It takes a lot of time and effort,
Yeah.
you know? No, it is. And like, let's be honest, like how much are people paying for therapy, you know? And it's like a small fraction of that, you know?
Right.
So yeah, no, I'm okay with it. You know what? I've had like very few haters. I'm waiting for more. I've had some, but knock on wood, I don't have any near me.
How do you deal with them? I have a friend who has a pretty big podcast, and the haters really get under her skin. She struggles with them. It is a button pushing thing. I get the impression with you just don't take shit, but I could be wrong.
You know, before I started this, when I thought about it, like I've always considered myself as somebody with like pretty thick skin. I'm not easily offended. Yes, there are times when it can bother me. I haven't really engaged. You know what I started doing when stuff was really bothering me? This is something that I would do. When somebody would leave me a nasty comment, I would write the comment back that I wanted to. I would post it. I would take a screenshot of it, and then I would immediately delete it. So you're like kind of getting it out.
Yeah.
But no, typically I don't. You know, one time that I really did get riled up though is I posted a clip from one of my episodes on TikTok, and it was of one of my Patreon peeps and her talking about her mom her walking home in the rain because her mom didn't come and pick her up. And just the comments like back were like, oh, you poor, like, and I really got protective, you know? But generally speaking, no. And the vast majority of the criticism I get is just that you curse too much. Here's another thing that I get. People feel like since there's not a lot of content on this particular topic, that therefore I should be producing content that is for everyone. So because there's not a lot of adult child stuff, I shouldn't be cursing because then that's alienating people who don't like that. But that goes against what adult child recovery is. It's about like living as our true selves. So I'm not going to fucking filter myself so that everybody likes me. Everybody's not going to like me. I don't want everyone to like me.
That's not how podcasts work. Podcasts work where you are ultra focused on one thing that you do better than anybody else, and you have to be your authentic self. So if your authentic self is to curse like a sailor, that's what you need to do. If people don't like it, start your own clean podcast on this topic.
That's what I've said back. I'm like, guess what? Anybody can start a podcast.
There are hundreds of alcoholism recovery podcasts of every type of flavor. And you know what? There's still room for more if you want to get involved. Your topic, I think, is pretty damn small. That's a room for growth. I looked at that and
like, there's a huge opening for that.
Huge.
So come at me.
I looked at that and like, damn, why didn't I do that? That's a great idea. And then I realized that's not my area of expertise where I would be insanely great. I can be insanely great on what I do, and I'm going to let somebody else where it's their passion to do the adult child stuff and be good with, you know, I'm just going to listen to them. I'll listen to that and it'll have them help me. Yeah. So if you want to support Andrea, which I think you should, let me make sure I'm bringing up the right website. Her website is adultchildpodcast.com. You can find her podcast anywhere. The person I know who has a pretty big podcast loves your art. I am not good with this, but your cover art is fabulous.
Oh, I found somebody on Upwork and they just did it.
Oh, they did a great job. They did a really good fantastic job. Yeah, if you want to,
the child is not a picture of me because I didn't have a picture of a child that was good enough, but the adult is.
Okay. Oh, I just assumed that was a picture of you as a child. Gave away a secret there.
Yeah, that's rigorous honesty, baby.
But if you like a broad who curses like a sailor and talks about family issues, which, you know, if you're,
I love being called a broad. Thank you for saying that.
I love that term, and when I call somebody a broad, it's because it's a compliment that they're tough.
A lot of broads would be.
If I ever use it, it's in. She just gave me the finger. Or
No,
gave them the
not
finger.
you, but like the women who don't like that term.
Yeah, I think it's in the nicest way, the best way to describe you, because you're tough as nails, and I'm glad that you're out there doing this. So I want you to listen to Adult Child Podcast. Andrea, we have been trying to connect, I feel like, for months, and I'm so glad we found time to do this.
Thank you. This is an honor. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. We'll see everybody next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.